They were 5, maybe 6 years old. Their job? To climb inside narrow chimneys, scraping soot with bare hands as hot smoke rose beneath them. In the countryside, other children spent their days standing alone in fields, shouting at birds. Some were lowered into cesspits to shovel out human waste by candlelight. This wasn't punishment. It was work, and it was normal 500 years ago. Good evening and welcome. If you found your way here tonight, you're probably settling in for rest. Maybe you're already tucked beneath warm covers, listening in the stillness of night, or perhaps you've had a long day and you're letting your mind slow down, letting it wander through softer places. Wherever you are, I'm glad you're here. Before we begin, I'd love to know, when and where are you watching from? Are you listening in bed, in the quiet of a dark room, or perhaps during a peaceful moment on a long journey? Let me know in the comments. I read every one, and it's always comforting to see where in the world our listeners are tuning in from. Now, gently close your eyes if you haven't already. Let your shoulders drop. Let your thoughts slow. You don't need to follow every word. Just let them wash over you like a breeze. Tonight, we begin a long, winding journey into the past. Not the history of kings and knights, but the forgotten, dusty corners of the world 5 centuries ago. A time when childhood as we know it didn't quite exist. In the early 1500s, whether you were born in a stone cottage or behind city walls, there was no pause before responsibility. No law said children should be protected from danger or given time to play. Childhood was not a gentle chapter of life. It was more like a slope you slid down quickly, often right into labor. If your family lived on a farm, you might carry water, feed chickens, or plant seeds before you could even read. If your family lived in a town, you might be sweeping chimneys, or hauling coal, or spending your days barefoot in the street searching for scraps to sell. Sometimes children were sent far from home to be apprenticed, abound, as they called it, to a master craftsman who might teach them a trade or simply use them as a servant for years. There were no toys unless you made them yourself, no breaks, no laws to say when you had worked enough. And yet, these children were not machines. They were little humans full of curiosity, stories, and imagination. Between chores, they played simple games, stones tossed into the dust, skipping through streets, songs sung in the rhythm of work. A girl might whisper secrets to a cat beneath the stairs. A boy might carve faces into bits of firewood while he waited for his master's call. Their lives were harsh, but never completely without light. The cities they lived in were places of noise and shadows. Streets were narrow, with buildings leaning in toward each other as if in secret conversation. Gutters overflowed when it rained. Tradesmen called out their wares. Smoke drifted from chimneys morning to night, painting the skies a dim gray. In the countryside, the silence could be just as heavy, broken only by the creak of a cartwheel, the bleat of a distant goat, or the rustle of a breeze in dry wheat. Over the course of this sleep story, we'll explore some of the strangest and most grueling jobs children held in the past. Some were filthy, some were terrifying, some were just strange. But all were real and all were common. We'll take it slowly, one story at a time. We'll walk through smoky towns and across damp farmland. We'll follow these children through kitchens, towers, rivers, and mines. We'll do it quietly with care, and always, always gently. This isn't a history lecture. It's a kind of remembrance, a slow unfolding of the quiet lives history forgot to record. And perhaps, through this, we'll feel a little more grateful for the warmth, comfort, and safety we so easily take for granted. So now, let your breath grow slower. Let your eyes rest. The world of 500 years ago is waiting, but we won't rush. There's time. Time to listen, time to imagine, and time to sleep. Our journey begins in the soot-covered back streets of a waking city. The rooftops are cold and steep, and the dawn light is pale and smoky. Chimney pots crowd the skyline like a forest of stone. Boom, boom. And within these tall, narrow stacks, tiny limbs are already moving. Here, amid the grime and brick, we'll meet the first of many forgotten workers. A child, no older than 6, his skin blackened with soot, his hands scraped raw from brickwork, his eyes stinging from smoke. His name, perhaps, is already lost to time, but his work, and the danger it carried, lives on in history. That story of the child chimney sweeps begins in just a moment. Now let us step into the smoky breath of the early morning city, where cobbled streets echo with the creak of wagons and the hush of damp footsteps. The rooftops are still dark silhouettes, and the sky is the dull grey of ash. In the shadowed lanes of urban England, 5 centuries ago, small children were already awake, rubbing sleep from their eyes with soot-streaked fingers, shivering under threadbare linen, awaiting the call of the master sweep. Some of these children were only 5 or 6 years old, so tiny, in fact, that their size was not merely a misfortune, but a requirement, for chimney sweeps needed small bodies. Not for decoration, nor for their laughter or innocence, but because only the smallest among them could wriggle up the narrow flues of hearths, some scarcely wider than a loaf of bread. There were no safety regulations, no union, no law, no pause for concern. The chimney was a workplace and a trap. Each morning, before the city stirred, these children would hoist a coarse blanket across their shoulders, clutch a bristle brush and a soot sack, and climb up into darkness. Imagine now, slowly, what it meant to climb. The stone below grows smaller. Your arms begin to shake. You wedge yourself into a tunnel no larger than your torso. The air grows still. You push upward, brushing creosote from the flue wall with your elbows and knees, your face pressed against the rough brick, breathing in a stale, choking blackness. And always, always, there is the fear that your limbs will lock, that the chimney will narrow unexpectedly, that you'll be stuck in the heart of a home, unseen and unheard. Some chimneys were bent at angles, forcing children to twist their bodies unnaturally to navigate them. If they lost their footing or grip, they could fall, sometimes many feet, landing on hot ashes or stone. Other times they would become wedged entirely, requiring desperate tugging from above or below. And sometimes they were simply not found until much later. Those who survived each climb emerged from the flue blinking and coughing, hair matted with soot, eyes burning and skin blackened as if dipped in ink. They would carry the soot sack with them, carefully gathering what was scraped from inside, because even soot had a price, sold to farmers as fertilizer. Their small hands would tremble as they wiped their mouths with rags, spitting black phlegm onto the cobblestones. The work was not occasional. It was daily, relentless, and utterly exhausting. Summer brought suffocating heat within the brick walls. Winter brought frozen hands and brittle air. Rest was rare. Injuries, burns from active hearths, crushed fingers, bruised ribs were common. And then there was the illness, whispered about in the years to come. Chimney sweep's carcinoma, a cancer of the scrotum, unique to these boys exposed so young to soot and tar. Some were orphans sold or given over to master sweeps who owned them until their usefulness faded. Others came from impoverished families who needed even a child's earnings to survive. They were promised food, shelter, a trade, but what they received was often hunger, scolding, and endless labor. The lucky ones received scraps of bread and a place to sleep near the hearth. The unlucky received bruises. And yet, despite all this, childhood flickered briefly in the margins. Some still remember laughter between climbs. They remember running barefoot over slates, the city sprawling below like a faded map. They remembered nicknames, scraped knuckles, and the bond of hardship. Or a scrap of song hummed from a rooftop. A single apricot stolen from a market cart. Moments brief and bright, like sparks rising from a chimney. Each day ended as it began, with fatigue and filth and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring another climb. Some sweeps slept beside the chimneys they cleaned, soot still clinging to their skin. Others curled near hearths once the fires went out, hoping for warmth without being noticed. Dreams came slowly, when they came at all. The smell of ash was everywhere. It soaked into the sheets, into hair and pores, into the lungs. And while chimney boys navigated soot-filled tunnels above the city, another group of children was beginning their own descent into the filth beneath the streets. As the rooftops turned red in the early sun, and the last flues cooled, young figures with shovels and sacks stepped into the shadows. Their job was not to remove soot, but something far heavier. They worked not in brick tunnels above homes, but in the cesspits beneath them. These were the night soil children, and their world was darker still. And so we leave the rooftops behind for now and descend into the muck and stench where the air is thick and the work unspeakable. The gong farmers and their young helpers awake. In the quiet hours of the night, when most of the town had gone to sleep and only the moon kept watch, a very different kind of work began. While others rested beneath thatched roofs and woolen blankets, a small group of children would rise, rub sleep from their eyes, and prepare for a task few dared to speak of in daylight. These were the night soil kids, young helpers to the gong farmers, whose job it was to empty the town's cesspits under cover of darkness. 500 years ago, sanitation looked very different than it does today. In cities and towns across Europe, chamber pots and privies emptied into deep, stinking pits beneath homes and alleyways. And though these were essential to the workings of a crowded town, they filled quickly and needed to be cleared before disease could spread. Enter the gong farmers, adults who specialized in waste removal, and the children who, small and light, were sent down into the pits themselves. The work was as filthy as you might imagine. Children, often no older than 7 or 8, would climb down ladders into the narrow, foul-smelling spaces. With a crude shovel, a bucket, or sometimes only their hands, they would begin to haul out the accumulated waste of dozens of households. The stench was overpowering, the air thick with rot and methane, and there was always the fear of losing footing and falling in entirely. Some cesspits were deep, poorly supported, or home to rats and insects that scurried over bare skin. It was dangerous work, and not only for the risk of falling. Exposure to human waste brought with it the threat of infection and illness. Without gloves, without boots, and often with only a cloth wrapped over their nose and mouth, children endured hours in the dark underworld of the city. Cuts and scrapes from tools or broken pottery mixed into the waste could fester. Clothes, once soaked in the foul slurry, rarely came clean. The smell clung to them, marking them in the streets the next morning, even after washing. Most of the labor was done in silence, not only to avoid waking townsfolk, but because the task left little room for conversation. The only sounds were the dull scrape of shovel against stone and the slosh of buckets being handed up. The children moved like shadows, their small forms nimble in the confined space. Achum. Older gong farmers waited above, hoisting buckets, grumbling orders, and pouring the contents into carts to be taken outside the town walls. Where did all this night soil go? Often it was carted away before dawn and sold as fertilizer to local farmers. Human waste, unpleasant as it was, proved valuable in nourishing the soil of distant fields. So the work of these children, though hidden and reviled, fed the very grain that returned to town in the months to come. Despite their contributions, night soil children were often shunned. Other children avoided them. Adults held their breath as they passed. No one wanted to be near the smell or reminded of the work that kept their own homes clean. But the children learned to carry it. They returned to the same homes night after night, unnoticed, unseen, doing what others would not. Occasionally, accidents did occur. A weakened wooden support might collapse, burying a child under waste. Others simply disappeared, presumed drowned or overcome by fumes. There were no formal records for these children, no guild to protect them. They lived on the margins, and when they vanished, they left little behind. And yet, in rare moments, there was companionship. Children huddled together at the edge of a pit, waiting for their turn, might whisper stories or pass stale bread between them. They watched the stars in moments of rest and laughed quietly at jokes. No one else would understand. In this hidden labor, bonds were formed that only those who had worked in the dark could truly appreciate. As the first signs of morning touched the rooftops, the children would retreat. Clothes soaked and bodies sore, they would return to cramped homes or alley nooks, curling up to sleep as the rest of the world began to wake. For them, the day was over, and yet their work had just made the town livable again. Their story, like so many others, is one whispered through history. A tale of labor done in silence, of children growing old before their time, and of a city unknowingly dependent on its smallest worker. And not far beyond the town walls, in open fields under wide skies, a different kind of child's labor was just beginning. The scarecrow children of the farmlands, who would stand watch all day in the cold wind, trading shouts and movement for a crust of bread and a few coins. Out in the open fields, beneath an ever-changing sky, some of the youngest laborers were stationed, not to harvest crops, but to frighten birds. These were the scarecrow children. Too small for heavy work, too poor for schooling, they were placed alone in vast farmlands, expected to stand or pace for hours, waving their arms or shouting to keep crows and starlings at bay. Their job may sound quaint now, but for a child of 6 or 7, it could be grueling. There were no sturdy posts or mannequins to lean against. They had only their voice, their gestures, and whatever scraps of movement they could muster in the long hours between dawn and dusk. Some carried rattles fashioned from string and bone. Others banged old pans or clapped bits of wood together, anything to scare off the hungry flocks. Seasons mattered deeply. In summer, the sun beat down relentlessly, with no shade in sight. Children could become sunburned, dizzy, and parched, but they were expected to remain alert, ever ready to shout or stomp. In winter, the farmlands turned hard and cruel. Frost-bitten fingers, numb toes, and wind-chilled faces became routine. Many wrapped their feet in rags or old sackcloth, hoping to stave off the cold as they stood on icy soil from morning till nightfall. Some children worked alone in isolated fields, and the silence could stretch on endlessly, broken only by the distant call of a bird or the creak of a scarecrow in the wind. Others labored near hedgerows or stone walls. Their presence was meant to replace costly adult labor or mechanical deterrence. A child was cheaper, quieter, and, if reprimanded, far easier to replace. And the pay, often it was not wages at all, but leftovers, crusts of bread, a few boiled potatoes, or a mug of watered ale. If the crops did well, the child might be allowed to keep a bundle of turnips or a handful of grain. If they failed, the bird's out small figure waving in the field, the child might be blamed. A cruel twist, given how little power they truly had. Some did their job with a sense of pride, imagining themselves as guardians of the field, keeping the harvest safe. Others grew bitter, knowing that each hour under the wide grey sky stole from their youth and wore down their bones. Rain would soak them through. Winds would whip their faces raw, and they would be expected to return the next day and do it all again. Villagers often passed these children without notice. They became part of the landscape, like the scarecrows they emulated, silent, motionless when no one looked, suddenly springing to life when birds approached. Some waved scarves, others screamed into the wind, their voices hoarse by midday. They learned to conserve movement, to time their cries, and to live inside their own minds, dreaming up stories or songs to pass the time. At night, these children returned home exhausted, their limbs stiff from standing, their feet blistered and cold. But sleep might not come easily. The next day would be the same. Another dawn, another silent battle with the birds. Still, for all the hardship, some found tiny moments of wonder, watching clouds roll past, seeing deer at the tree line, or tracing the stars as they emerged in a fading twilight. In these brief flickers of beauty, they clung to something tender, something still untouched by labor. Their clothes, often hand-me-downs or patched wool, hung loosely, fluttering in the gentle breeze. The scent of damp earth mingled with the faint aroma of wildflowers and hay. The world was vast and quiet, but these children moved through it as unseen sentinels. Sometimes a stray dog or a curious bird would pause, casting a quick glance before dashing away. The rhythm of their day was unchanging. Rise before dawn, trudge to the field, stand and wave, rest only when the birds dispersed, and then return home, often with nothing to show but tired muscles and the hope of a warmer tomorrow. As the year turned, their role shifted slightly. In the spring, when crops were young and vulnerable, their vigilance was sharpest. Summer brought relentless heat and endless hours. Autumn whispered promises of harvest, but the scarecrow children's work was never truly done until the last grain was gathered. As we leave the chilly farmland behind, we turn toward another hidden corner of childhood toil, not under open skies this time, but deep within the steamy heart of a medieval kitchen. There, by the roaring hearth and the turning spit, children labored in a very different kind of heat, one where dogs ran in circles and young eyes watched with weary patience. Let us step into the world of turnspit dogs and the small hands that kept them running. Deep within the bustling castles and manor houses of medieval England, there was a curious and often harsh job, one that many children found themselves saddled with. This was the role of the spit boy or a dog boy, young helpers responsible for tending to the turnspit dogs, small hounds trained to run inside a wheel, turning the heavy spits over open fires. Their relentless labor kept roast cooking slowly and evenly, filling the kitchens with the rich smells of meat and hearth. Imagine stepping into a dark, smoky kitchen filled with the roar of the fire, thick with the scent of wood smoke and roasting meat. The air was hot and humid, stifling and heavy, pressing against every skin like a thick blanket. The children assigned to this task were often as young as 7 or 8, their clothes threadbare and stained with soot, their hands rough from endless work. Their job was to ensure the turnspit dogs kept moving, coaxing them to run tirelessly inside the wheels, day after day, hour after hour, without pause. The dogs, usually small and wiry, were kept on leashes or within enclosures built around the wheels. They did not run for pleasure, but out of necessity, forced by the weight of the spit and the demands of the kitchen staff. The children's task was to watch over them closely, encouraging them to keep pace, sometimes using harsh words or small prods. If the dogs slowed or stopped, the meat might burn or cook unevenly, a failure that could bring sharp scolding from the cooks or even harsher reprimands from the Lord's household. For the children, this work was exhausting and monotonous. The heat of the kitchen was oppressive, sweat mixing with grime, soot, and the pungent smell of roasting meat. Their lungs filled with smoke and dust, making every breath a small labor. Their hands, blistered and cracked from gripping leashes and wooden parts, were never truly clean. There was little rest, and the danger of burns from the roaring fire was ever present. One careless step or distracted moment could mean a painful injury. Yet, despite the hardship, these children remained vigilant, bound to this demanding routine that shaped their days. Their eyes constantly flicked between the turnspit dogs and the sizzling meat, always alert to the slightest change. The rhythm of the dog's steps set the pace for the kitchen itself. Too fast and the meat might be undercooked. Too slow and it could burn. Precision and endurance were their unlikely companions. In some households, these spit boys were seen as little more than servants, pushed to the margins of the household's attention and often scolded or treated harshly. Their presence was barely acknowledged beyond their immediate tasks. But occasionally, a kinder cook or housekeeper would offer a small kindness, a warm drink to soothe their parched throats, a crust of bread when meal times were sparse. Still, the children had little time to eat or rest properly, their days measured by the slow turning of the meat and the relentless motion of the dog's wheels. The relationship between child and dog was complex and sometimes tender. The dogs depended on the children's encouragement and care to keep moving, while the children found a strange companionship in these animals, who shared their confinement and toil. In a world often cruel to both, this silent partnership was a small solace. Yet cruelty was common, both toward the animals and the children, and many spit boys endured rough treatment from those above them. The dogs themselves sometimes suffered neglect or worse, and the children's small hands were tasked not only with tending to the wheel, but sometimes soothing these anxious creatures. The turnspit wheel itself was a marvel of medieval ingenuity, a wooden contraption designed to harness the dog's energy for a vital kitchen task. Though the sight might seem strange or even cruel today, this wheel was crucial for feeding entire households, especially during grand feasts or the long winter months when fresh food was scarce and hearty roasted meat was a luxury. As the day faded into night, the kitchen grew quieter. The dogs slowed their pace, their panting breaths mingling with the dying crackle of embers. The children's muscles ached deeply from standing and watching, the sweat drying in thin films on their soot-streaked faces. But soon they would rise again, for the endless cycle of heat, motion, and service never truly ceased in the medieval kitchen. From these stifling, fiery kitchens, our journey now moves outside once more, to the muddy banks of the Thames and other rivers, where children known as mudlarks search tirelessly for valuables among the filth and debris. Here, in the dim light of dawn, young scavengers braved cold water and foul smells, hoping to find forgotten treasures or scraps to sell. Let us wander down to the river's edge and listen closely to the whispered stories of these fearless children. Along the winding edges of the Thames River and other waterways, a very different kind of childhood toil unfolded, one soaked in mud, shadowed by the grime of the city, and filled with the faint hope of finding lost treasures. These were the mudlarks and river scavengers, children who ventured out before dawn, searching through muck and waste for anything of value. Imagine the chill of early morning fog, hanging low over the water, muffling the world in a quiet grey hush. Barefoot or shod in worn boots, these children crept along slippery banks, their hands cold and numb as they sifted through the thick, slimy mud. The air was heavy with the sharp, sour scent of decay mixed with river water and salt. Old ropes, broken bottles, lost coins, bits of wood, and discarded metal scraps all lay half buried beneath the filth, small fortunes for those who could find them. Mudlarking was dangerous work. Sharp shards could cut bare skin, tangled nets might trap a foot, and the water's edge was slippery and uncertain. Falling into the river meant risking drowning or infection. Disease lurked in every drop, typhoid, cholera, and other illnesses spread by polluted water and waste. Yet despite these risks, these children worked tirelessly, driven by hunger, poverty, or the need to support their families. The muddy riverbanks were a world apart from the polished floors and roaring kitchens of the castles. Here, the rhythm of life was dictated by the tides and the shifting silt. Some children worked alone, others in small groups, sharing whispered stories to ward off fear and loneliness. They learned to recognize the best spots where treasure might hide, the bend of a river, the shadow beneath a jetty, or the sandbars that appeared with low tide. Mudlarks had to be quick and careful. Each find was precious, no matter how small. A copper coin, a broken piece of jewelry, a discarded tool. Sometimes they found nothing but old bones or rubbish, but even these could be sold to tanners or bone grinders. Their earnings were meager but vital, often spent on food or clothing. The work began long before sunrise, when the city streets were silent and the fog thick. In the dim light, the children moved quietly, careful not to disturb the waking households or the guards who patrolled the riverbanks. Their feet, often bare or clad in threadbare shoes, slipped on stones and tangled roots. Their fingers, stiff with cold, reached deep into the muck, feeling for anything worth salvaging. Some mudlarks carried small sacks or baskets to hold their finds, while others hid their treasures beneath cloaks or inside worn pockets. Every piece collected was a small victory, a tiny hope against the harshness of daily life. Yet the river was unforgiving. Sudden waves could wash away carefully gathered spoils, and muddy banks could collapse beneath an unsuspecting child. Returning home was no less perilous. The sun, now higher, revealed the dirt and grime clinging to their clothes and skin. They would slip quietly through narrow alleys and doorways, hoping to avoid harsh questions or scorn. Many had siblings and parents relying on their meager earnings, and the pressure to find something valuable never truly ceased. Despite the filth and danger, the river was also a place of quiet beauty. The water mirrored the rising sun, casting shimmering patterns on the underside of bridges and along weathered stone walls. Birds like herons and kingfishers darted above the water's surface, and the soft rush of flowing current provided a gentle, constant sound. Some children found brief moments of peace while watching the changing sky or the slow dance of dragonflies near the reeds. These fleeting glimpses of nature's calm were small comforts amid the demanding rhythm of their lives. As the day wore on and the mudlarks rested, another kind of apprentice stirred elsewhere. A young apprentice in a shadowy apothecary's workshop. Here, the air was thick with the scent of crushed herbs and strange chemicals. The apprentice ground powders, measured potions, and learned the delicate balance between healing and harm. The work was precise and often dangerous, requiring care and knowledge passed down through generations. The flicker of candlelight cast long shadows across wooden shelves, lined with jars of dried roots, crushed minerals. From the river's edge to the quiet workbench, the stories of medieval childhood labor continued, each one a testament to resilience and survival. Let us now enter the dimly lit rooms of the apothecary, where curious young minds mingled with dangerous substances, and where the line between medicine and magic blurred in the flickering candlelight. In quiet, shadowed rooms tucked away from bustling streets and muddy riverbanks, another kind of childhood labor unfolded, one marked by curiosity, danger, and the fragile balance between healing and harm. These were the apothecary apprentices, young hands learning the secrets of herbs, minerals, and alchemical mixtures. Their world was one of delicate powders, pungent aromas, and flickering candlelight, where medicine and magic often intertwined. Imagine a dimly lit workshop, its wooden shelves lined with glass jars filled with dried herbs, crushed roots, shimmering salts, and mysterious powders. The scent was thick and complex, a mingling of lavender, wormwood, sulfur, and something faintly metallic. Here, young apprentices ground ingredients with stone mortars and pestles, carefully measuring powders with wooden spoons, and mixing tinctures in fragile glass vials. Each motion required patience, precision, and respect for the volatile materials at hand. The dangers were many. Mercury, arsenic, and lead, common components in many remedies, could slowly poison those who worked with them day after day. Fumes from boiling herbs and chemical reactions sometimes filled the cramped spaces, making the air heavy and difficult to breathe. Explosions and burns were not unheard of, especially when inexperienced apprentices mixed unstable compounds. Yet the allure of discovery, the hope of creating cures that might ease pain or illness, kept these young workers focused and diligent. Their training was as much about observation as manual skill. Apprentices learned to recognize subtle differences between plants, some harmless, others deadly. They memorized recipes passed down through generations, blending superstition and science in ways strange to us today. The line between magic and medicine was thin, and rituals often accompanied preparation of medicines, invoking saints or reciting prayers to protect against harm. Days were long and repetitive. Apprentices began work early, grinding herbs until their arms ached, mixing potions under watchful eyes of masters who were both teachers and stern taskmasters. Mistakes could mean ruined batches of medicine, or worse, harm to patients who relied on their skill. The apothecary's workshop was often a place of quiet mystery. Shelves held oddities like dried toads, powdered bones, and rare resins brought from distant lands. Young apprentices sometimes marveled at these strange objects, wondering about their power and purpose. Some herbs were said to cure fevers, others to ward off evil spirits. Apprentices prepared salves for wounds, syrups for coughs, and tinctures for pain, mixing ingredients with reverence bordering on the spiritual. As apprentices grew more skilled, they sometimes accompanied apothecaries to visit patients, carrying small vials or poultices to soothe aches and illnesses. These journeys exposed them to harsh realities of medieval life, poverty, disease, and suffering that could overwhelm even the best remedies. Despite the challenges, the work held a strange allure. Turning raw plants and minerals into medicine felt like a kind of magic. Apprentices were proud to play a role in healing their communities, even if their knowledge was limited and mixed with superstition. In flickering candlelight, apprentices sometimes heard whispered tales of miraculous cures or dreadful poisons, stories passed down like secret knowledge. They learned some plants could heal, but others could harm, that a tiny mistake in measurement could be deadly. This world was part science, part folklore, a delicate dance between hope and risk. Apprentices often worked closely with other healers, wise women, midwives, and barber surgeons, learning different approaches to medicine and care. They saw firsthand the limits of their craft, where some illnesses remained mysterious and untreatable. They learned humility, patience, and respect for the forces they sought to control. The apothecary's shop was more than a workplace. It was where knowledge was preserved and passed on, where young apprentices found education and responsibility at a tender age. Some dreamed of becoming master apothecaries. Others saw the work as a necessary step in a difficult life. As dusk gave way to night, the air outside grew colder and the sounds of the city faded. Apprentices extinguished their lamps and prepared to rest. But far beneath the earth, in narrow, suffocating tunnels, another group of children faced a vastly different kind of toil. Known as tunnel rats, these young miners crawled through tight shafts, carrying candles to light the way, always alert to dangers of collapse, toxic air, and darkness that could swallow them whole. From delicate powders of the apothecary's workshop to harsh shadows of the mines below, the lives of medieval children were woven with toil, courage, and resilience. Let us now descend with them into the underground world of child miners and tunnel rats. Deep beneath the earth's surface, far from daylight and bustling streets, lay a world both silent and perilous. Here, in twisting, narrow tunnels of medieval mines, children known as tunnel rats crawled and worked. Their small size allowed them to squeeze through tight shafts older miners could not enter. But the dangers they faced were severe. Tunnel collapses, suffocating dust, poisonous gases, and the ever-present darkness that could swallow them whole. These young miners carried simple tools and a single candle or lantern to light their way through the blackness. The air was thick and heavy, often filled with dust and the scent of damp stone. Every breath was a test, and the faintest tremor in the earth could signal disaster. The silence was profound, broken only by the scrape of pickaxes and occasional fearful whispers. Life underground was isolating. The children worked in cramped, shadowed chambers where the only sound was the echo of their movements. They labored for hours, sometimes days, digging for precious metals, coal, or salt, materials vital for the medieval economy and daily life above. The work was backbreaking and relentless, with no time for rest or play. The tunnels were cold and damp. Water seeped through walls, pooling on rocky floors and making footing treacherous. Mud clung to clothes and skin, and the chill settled deep into the bones. The children wore little protective clothing, and exposure to cold could lead to sickness and long-term health problems. Accidents were common. Tunnel collapses could trap workers forever. Toxic gases could poison lungs and end lives swiftly. Many children suffered injuries or chronic illnesses caused by years inhaling dust and working in harsh conditions. Some never returned home, swallowed by the dark earth they toiled within. Despite the dangers, these children persevered, driven by necessity, harsh demands, or hope of earning a small wage to support their family. Some came from mining families, learning the trade young, while others were sent by landowners or mine operators. The mines were grim places, but crucial to the medieval economy, providing coal for fires, metals for tools and weapons, and salt for preserving food. Underground, time seemed to stand still. Darkness was unyielding, silence profound, air thick with dust of crushed rock. Working as a tunnel rat was solitary, where courage and endurance were essential. The children relied on each other for safety, watching for signs of danger and offering quiet encouragement, navigating treacherous passages. When the shift ended and children emerged from the earth's depths, they were coated in grime, exhausted, carrying the weight of a dangerous day's work. The sun's light was harsh and unfamiliar after hours underground, but brought a brief reprieve, a chance to wash dirt away and rest before the cycle began anew. Yet their labor underground was just one facet of childhood in this era. Above ground, other children served in grand stone castles and manor houses dotting the countryside. These serving boys had very different duties, but no less demanding. Inside those great stone halls, serving boys took on tasks vital to noble households. They polished armor until it gleamed, a reflection of their youthful determination. They carried chamber pots, a humbling but necessary chore, and fanned nobles during hot days, their small hands moving rhythmically to provide comfort in stifling air. Constantly supervised, these boys lived under strict discipline. They were expected to obey without question, endure harsh punishments for mistakes, and navigate a complex social world where every action could have consequences. Their days were filled with errands, fetching food and water, running messages through vast corridors lined with tapestries and suits of armor. Though young, they were keen observers. They often witnessed intrigues and politics of noble courts, hearing whispered conversations and witnessing moments of tension shaping kingdom's fate. Yet these secrets were beyond their understanding, and speaking out could bring severe consequences. Serving boys were chosen for their small stature, agility, and willingness to endure hardship. They trained in household ways, learning manners, care of servants' tools, and sometimes basics of swordsmanship or horsemanship. preparing them for future roles as knights or retainers. Their lives were a blend of duty and discipline, punctuated by brief moments of camaraderie and youthful play. The castle's walls held stories of loyalty, hardship, and quiet resilience, with these boys at the heart of daily life, often unseen and unheard. From darkness of minds to grandeur of castles, lives of medieval children were woven into fabric of a world very different from our own, filled with hardship and resilience. Next, we step inside those great stone halls to explore the lives of these serving boys, whose days were shaped by duty, discipline, and a world of noble. Within the towering stone walls of castles and grand manor houses, serving boys move swiftly and quietly, their days filled with duties vital to the household's smooth running. Though young, often no older than 10 or 12, these boys bore heavy responsibilities. They polished armor until it shone like mirrors, a symbol not only of their work, but of the noble warriors it protected. This task required patience and care, a steady hand to buff every curve and joint without scratching the metal. It was an art in itself, a blend of craftsmanship and devotion that connected the servant to the history and power embodied by each piece. Beyond the clang of armor, they carried out less glamorous chores, fetching water from deep wells, carrying heavy pots of food, and attending to the needs of their masters were daily tasks. Carrying chamber pots was a humbling, unpleasant duty, yet one essential in an age before modern plumbing. The boys learned quickly to accept such work with quiet dignity, understanding that their service, no matter how menial, was part of the larger workings of the household. In these moments, their hands were never idle, and their eyes ever watchful for the next command. The castle was a world of hierarchy and rules, where every servant knew their place and their expected behavior. The serving boys were supervised constantly, expected to obey orders without hesitation or question. Punishments for mistakes or disobedience could be harsh, sometimes cruel, ranging from scoldings to physical beatings. This strict discipline was intended to instill obedience and maintain order in a household that was both a home and a place of governance. The boys learned early that a single misstep could bring harsh consequences, yet within this structured life, moments of camaraderie and youthful spirit still found a way to flourish. In hidden corners or behind thick tapestries, boys would exchange whispered stories, share stolen snacks, or imagine worlds beyond the castle walls. These small acts of rebellion and friendship provided comfort amid demanding days. They found joy in fleeting moments, a game of chance with dice, a secret glance shared during meal preparations, or the warmth of a whispered joke when no adults were near. Serving boys were also keen observers, absorbing the undercurrents of noble life. They overheard whispered conversations about politics, alliances, and battles, secrets far beyond their years but essential to the world around them. Though they could not fully grasp these complexities, the knowledge shaped their understanding of power and survival. Sometimes they glimpsed the faces of important guests, watched nobles negotiate treaties, or witnessed the tensions of a household on the brink of change. Many serving boys hoped their service would lead to better futures. Some aspired to become knights, learning swordplay and horsemanship under the watchful eye of their masters or other castle retainers. For them, serving was an apprenticeship not just in chores, but in the ways of chivalry and warfare. Others dreamed of escaping servitude altogether, though opportunities for freedom were rare and uncertain. Still, hope persisted quietly in their hearts, a candle burning in the shadowed corridor. The castles themselves, with their echoing halls and towering battlements, stood as symbols of power and protection, but also of hardship for those within. The walls witnessed loyalty and betrayal, courage and fear, all experienced in the daily lives of those who served. The grand tapestries and ornate furnishings hid stories of struggle and endurance, the sacrifices made by those often forgotten. As dusk fell outside the castle windows and long shadows stretched across the courtyards, a different kind of childhood labor stirred in the shadows of old homes and barns. Young apprentices to rat catchers prepared for their nightly work, ready to flush out pests that threatened food supplies and health. These apprentices faced bites, scratches, and disease as part of their grim duty. Theirs was a world of darkness and danger, a nightly battle to protect the very survival of their communities. From polished armor to dark corners where rats lurked, the spectrum of medieval childhood labor was broad and often harsh. The quiet courage and resilience of these children remind us how different their lives were from our own, shaped by the demands of their time and place. Let us now turn our attention to these brave rat catchers' apprentices, whose nights were filled with danger and determination. As darkness fell over villages and towns, a different kind of childhood labor began, one hidden in shadows and often overlooked. Rat catchers' apprentices, usually boys no older than 10 or 12, took up their dangerous nightly duties, protecting their communities from the relentless threat of rats. These pests were more than mere nuisances. They were carriers of disease and a constant menace to food supplies, making the rat catchers' work vital to health and survival in medieval times. Accompanying seasoned rat catchers, the apprentices ventured into homes, barns, and cellars armed with simple but essential tools, nets, traps, and sometimes ferrets, trained to flush out the rodents. These boys crawled through holes and dark spaces where the sharp eyes of rats darted through shadows, and the air was thick with the musty smell of decay. Scratches and bites were common, and the ever-present risk of contracting serious illnesses like plague or typhus cast a constant shadow over their work. The apprentices' work was grueling and often terrifying. Moving quietly to avoid startling the rats, they carefully set traps or encouraged their ferrets to chase out the vermin. They learned to read the subtle signs of rat activity, the faint scurry of feet on wooden beams, gnaw marks on food stores and timbers, and the soft, unsettling sounds echoing in hidden corners. Patience, courage, and a steady hand were essential, as was a growing resilience to the darkness and solitude of their task. Sometimes the apprentices had to squeeze through narrow, crumbling passages beneath old buildings or inside walls, places adults dared not enter. These cramped, dusty spaces were filled with cobwebs and the constant risk of collapse or suffocation. Yet the boys pressed on, determined to protect their families and communities from the silent, creeping dangers lurking unseen. The smell of old wood, earth, and decay was a harsh, unyielding presence. Though the apprentices grew accustomed to it, the stench never lost its sharpness or its reminder of the harsh realities they faced. The darkness was near complete, broken only by the flicker of a lantern or the faint glow of a candle. In this eerie world, silence was punctuated by the soft patter of tiny feet or the sudden rustle of a fleeing rat. Their work often went unnoticed by the townsfolk, who slept safely while the apprentices battled these unseen threats. Yet this dangerous labor was crucial, a frontline defense against outbreaks of plague and the ruin of precious food supplies. Their bravery kept entire communities safer, though the risks they faced were great. As dawn approached and the village began to stir, the apprentices retreated from their grim nocturnal world. Coated in grime and exhaustion, they prepared to face daylight and the new day's chores. Their bravery faded into the background as daily life resumed, but their role remained vital. Not far from these villages, another group of children worked high above the rooftops, climbing steep towers to ring bells that marked the passing hours. These bell ringers and clock tower climbers were chosen for their small size and agility, tasked with ringing the bells that called people to work. Their work was demanding and perilous. The constant exposure to deafening sounds strained their ears, while fierce storms and dizzying heights posed ever-present threats. Despite these challenges, their role was one of vital importance, marking the rhythm of daily life in medieval communities. Their voices echoed across foggy villages, tolling time in an age-long past. The children climbed narrow spiral staircases, wooden ladders, and rickety platforms high above the village streets. The stones beneath their feet were often damp and slippery, the air cold and thin at such height. They learned to balance carefully, their small hands gripping ropes and beams as they moved. Bell ringing was not merely a matter of pulling ropes. It required strength, timing, and coordination. The children learned to control the massive bells, some weighing hundreds of pounds, swinging them so their chimes could be heard for miles. The deep tolls marked the passage of time, signaling dawn and dusk, calling villagers to prayers, and announcing important events. The constant noise was overwhelming. Their ears rang long after their shifts ended, a reminder of their duties. Sometimes storms battered the towers with fierce winds threatening to throw them off balance. Yet the children persisted, dedicated to their task. The bells became the voice of the community, their rhythms guiding daily life, work, worship, and rest. From these heights, the bell ringers watched over the village below, a silent yet vital presence. Next, we will explore the lives of these bell ringers and clock tower climbers, children whose courage and skill kept the heartbeat of medieval villages alive. High above the village rooftops, children known as bell ringers and clock tower climbers held a unique and demanding role. Chosen for their small size and nimble agility, these young workers climbed narrow, winding staircases and rickety ladders within the stone towers of medieval churches and town halls. Their duty was to ring the great bells that marked time, called people to worship, and announced births, deaths, or danger. It was a responsibility both vital and perilous. The bells themselves were massive, some weighing hundreds or even thousands of pounds. Swinging them required careful control and strength, especially in the older towers where the rope pulleys creaked with age. The children learned quickly how to manage their timing, how to brace their bodies against the pull of the rope, and how to let the bell speak without being pulled aloft by its weight. The tolling sound echoed far and wide over meadows, hills, and forests, and was often the first and last sound villagers heard each day. Their work began early. Before the sun rose, they would make the cold climb upward, often by candlelight or with a flickering lantern. The stone steps were damp and slick, and wind seeped through the narrow arrow slits in the walls. Reaching the bell chamber, they would wait for the right moment, then pull and pull again. Each note was meant to be clear, spaced, and full. Too fast, and the sound would blur. Too slow, and the rhythm of the day would be thrown off. Exposure to the thunderous bells was constant. Many suffered early hearing loss, though such things had no name at the time. Some remembered a ringing in their ears long after the climb was over, a ghostly echo of the sound they had unleashed into the world. Others bore bruises or rope burns, small reminders of their dedication to the invisible task of keeping time alive. The view from their perch was like no other. From the bell chamber windows or open slits, they could see fields stretching far, flocks of birds rising with the wind, and clouds sliding over distant hills. On some days, when fog rolled in and swallowed the earth below, it felt as though they were floating in a world between sky and stone. Even in solitude, they carried the village's pulse, their hands tethered to its passing hours. Storms made the task treacherous. Rain slicked every surface. Wind rattled the wooden beams and howled through cracks. Still, the bells had to ring, especially when danger approached. A toll during a fire, invasion, or sudden death was not optional. It was a call to arms or to prayer. The children braved these conditions, quietly heroic in their persistence. Festivals and holy days brought different kinds of challenges. Bells had to ring in joyful rhythms, quick, bright, and triumphant. Sometimes the children were asked to climb higher to hang flags or lanterns or to tend the tower's clock if one existed. These duties, though tiring, connected them to the heartbeat of the village. The tower was not only a place of toil, but one of perspective, a high seat from which life could be watched unfolding below. Despite the isolation of the towers, the children weren't always forgotten. Villagers knew their value, and on feast days, a small treat, a bit of bread, a warm drink, might be brought up to them. Older ringers passed along tips and encouragement to the younger ones, building a quiet tradition of mentorship in the shadows of the great bells. Some grew into old age, still feeling the rhythm of the pull in their shoulders, and yet, while some children scaled towers, others roamed the road. There were those whose work was not above the rooftops, but across the landscape. Young performers and jesters who traveled from town to town with troops of entertainers. These were the child fools and acrobats, dancers and singers, whose voices and steps filled marketplaces with delight or sorrow. Their lives were marked by movement. No tower to climb, but always a road ahead. They swapped the echo of bells for the rhythm of drums, the solitude of stone for the buzz of crowded squares. Where the bell ringers marked time, these performers suspended it, if only for a few fleeting minutes. Next, we'll follow the painted footsteps of these young entertainers into their world of laughter and labor, applause and anxiety, as we explore the restless journey of traveling performers and child fools. The life of a traveling performer in the late Middle Ages was one of color, rhythm, and constant motion. But behind the jingle of bells and the laughter of crowds lay a life of hardship, risk, and uncertainty, especially for the youngest members of the troupe. These were the child fools, dancers, tumblers, singers, and animal handlers who moved from village to village under the banner of traveling entertainment. Their audience saw wonder and whimsy, but their journey was one of toil, exposure, and fragile survival. Troops were often a patchwork family, some related by blood, others taken in as apprentices or foundlings. Children were expected to learn quickly. A mistake on stage could mean an empty bowl at supper. Juggling, tumbling, balancing acts, mimed comedy, puppet shows, these were all part of the repertoire. Even the youngest might be taught to do flips, to sing on cue, or to charm a goose into dancing for coin. Each child was a spectacle, trained not only to perform, but to please, always watching the crowd's shifting moods. Costumes were often patched and mismatched, designed to dazzle from afar, with bright dyes and stitched on bells. Painted cheeks and rouged lips gave a mask of joy, even on the coldest nights. Performances took place in market squares, outside alehouses, or within the dim light of a manor's hall. The wind might bite, rain might fall, but the show went on. Some children were jesters in miniature, encouraged to speak nonsense, make puns, or fall clumsily for laughs. Others served as musical echoes to the adult minstrels, adding a high, clear voice to melodies or playing small pipes and drums. The lucky ones might travel with trained animals, small dogs, even monkeys, each part of an elaborate dance of distraction. But behind the painted scenes, bruised knees, sore backs, and empty bellies were constant companions. Travel was constant. They slept where they could, stables, wagons, shared tents, or even outdoors under the stars. Illness spread easily. Shoes wore out. Performances brought coin when crowds were generous, but if the weather turned foul or locals were suspicious, they might go hungry for days. Some towns with strict guild rules or fear of outsiders might drive them out before they could perform. Yet for many children, this life held strange allure. The freedom of the road, the thrill of applause, and the camaraderie of the troupe offered a sense of belonging. Unlike other children, they weren't tied to a single field, kitchen, or shop. They saw castles, forests, marketplaces. They tasted liberty, but it came at the cost of never knowing safety or permanence. Relationships within troops were complex. Older performers sometimes mentored the young, teaching the timing of a bow, the rhythm of a line, the subtle art of reading a crowd. But not all mentors were kind. Some exploited the children's talent, using them to attract crowds while keeping most earnings. And children, too small to defend themselves or protest, often endured in silence. Religious authorities were ambivalent. Some clergy saw performers as carriers of vice and foolishness. Others welcomed the joy they brought, especially on feast days. The line between sacred and secular blurred, and some troops were even hired by monasteries or noble households to entertain during solemn events. Rain-soaked mornings, empty crowds, aching feet from dancing on cobblestones, the clatter of a tambourine echoing in a silent square, the strange hush before laughter. These were the textures of a life in motion, and when the show ended and the makeup washed away, the children remained tired, hopeful, hungry, and ready to perform again at the next village gate. There were no contracts for most child performers. Their value was in the moment, their security as fleeting as the applause they chased. They had no apprenticeship, no master's certificate to aim for, only the next road, the next crowd, the next role. Their work blurred survival and spectacle, labor and art, but not all children were destined to roam. For every dancer in a square, there were others whose lives followed rigid paths of training and repetition. These were the apprentices, the bound children of workshops and guild halls. Their journeys began not with the strum of a lute or the spin of a wheel, but with a contract and often a farewell to their family. In the next chapter, we step inside the dusty workshops and smoky forges of medieval towns, where children train to become blacksmiths, weavers, cobblers, and tanners. Their lives were shaped by discipline, long hours, and the slow mastery of a single trade. From hammering iron to weaving thread, we'll meet those bound to the workshop, children whose labor built the everyday world around them. Across the towns and villages of the medieval world, not every child moved with a traveling troupe or toiled in the shadows. Some were bound by ink, by oath, and by time, to the workshop, the forge, or the loom. These were the apprentices, children set on a path to master a craft, their lives shaped by repetition, discipline, and skill. Often around age 7 or 8, a child might be handed to a master craftsman by their family or a guild. The child would live with their master, becoming part of the household, working from dawn to nightfall. Their labor was not just physical, it was social and deeply woven into the rhythms of medieval life. They were workers in training, but also watchers, imitators, and gradually creators. Workshops varied. A blacksmith's forge roared with heat and clangs of iron. The smell of scorched metal, the glow of coals, and the thud of effort shaped the space. Apprentices began by carrying buckets and sweeping ash. In time, they heated iron, held tongs, after many careful seasons, struck the hammer themselves. The rhythm of the forge became the rhythm of the child's body, every motion trained and repeated. In the weaver's loft, the air was full of fiber and the steady creak of beams. Children might card wool, sort flax, or dye thread in vats of color. Their fingers grew nimble, eyes attuned to texture. Each knot, twist, and stitch mattered. A child who once tangled thread learned to move with practiced grace. Tanners dealt in hides, and the smell of their trade clung to everything. Apprentices helped soak skins. Lime, urine, and animal brains were part of the process. The work was hard, but leather was essential for shoes, belts, armor. Children here learned endurance and precision, even as their nostrils burned. There was little glamour, but much to learn. Cobblers shaped shoes, cutting, stitching, measuring. Each pair bespoke a different need: boots for laborers, slippers for nobles, pointed shoes for fashion. Apprentices knelt often, worked quietly, and spent years before crafting a shoe from start to finish. Even the patterns were passed down with care, drawn and redrawn across thin parchment. Each guild had its ritual. Most required a contract signed with witnesses, binding the child to the master for years, often 7. During that time, they received food, shelter, and training, but no wages. In return, they served loyally and learned diligently. Breaking a contract brought disgrace. The end of an apprenticeship might involve a ceremony and sometimes a test, a masterpiece to prove the skills learned across so many quiet hours. Discipline was strict. Mistakes earned sharp words or extra tasks. But success brought freedom, more trust, better tools, and eventually the chance to make things independently. If deemed worthy, the apprentice became a journeyman, able to earn wages and perhaps rise to master. The title wasn't just a rank, it was identity, a mark of skill, and a place in the craft's lineage. Some masters were kind, others harsh. In crowded towns, the workshop was a world unto itself, part school, part home. In winter, children worked by candlelight. In summer, they sweated through long afternoons, tools slick in their hands. A drop of sweat might stain parchment or fall unnoticed on red-hot iron. Girls apprenticed too, often in spinning, weaving, brewing, or embroidery. Some trained under nuns, others with merchants' wives. Their labor was essential. Fine linen, lace, and brood ale all bore a young girl's quiet imprint. In cottage industries, the household was both home and workshop. While others played, apprentices lived in measured steps. Their world was not wide but deep. One task, one lesson, repeated until body and memory fused. Yet even here, there were satisfactions, a clean seam, a well-shaped nail, a nod from the master. The scent of wood shavings, the heat of forged metal, each a silent language they learned to speak without words. Not all reached the end. Illness, poverty, or conflict could interrupt the path. But for those who endured, mastery brought pride. They became the heartbeat of towns, the ones who made, repaired, sustained. A shoemaker's apprentice might one day walk past the chapel and see villagers wearing his work. That was legacy. That was craft. And in moments when the forge cooled, the loom fell silent, or the last stitch was tied, even the most devoted apprentice might pause and wonder, did I choose this path, or did it choose me? Next, we turn from labor to stillness. We reflect on what it meant to be a child in an age without rest, and how, through hardship, moments of care and quiet dreaming still flickered like candlelight in the dark. As the last hammer falls and the workshop settles, we step gently into a space where work fades and rest begins. And now, with the workshop quiet and the fire banked for the night, we come to the final chapter in our journey. The children we followed, chimney sweeps, gong farmers, scarecrow boys, and apprentice weavers, fade into the hush of history. Their stories, once loud with toil and motion, grow still, like dust settling in a sunlit room. Childhood 5 centuries ago was not measured in school days or storybooks. It was marked by tasks completed, hours endured, and skills acquired. To be a child was to belong to work, to family, to community need. Most did not dream of freedom. They dreamed of warmth, of bread, of a quiet moment with the world at peace. We who now fall asleep in comfort have inherited a different world, one where childhood is often safeguarded, where rest is expected, where play and imagination are not luxuries, but rights. This difference, vast and silent, traces itself through laws and customs, but also through hearts willing to remember. To remember those small hands that shape the past, often unnoticed, often unloved. For some, labor was a family's only hope. A boy in a mine lighting his way with a flickering taper. A girl at a spinning wheel singing softly to steady her fingers. A child knee-deep in river mud, eyes sharp for glints of coin. These lives were not myths. They were ordinary. They were millions. Their hardship was not always cruelty. It was the fabric of a world still learning compassion. And amid all that work, there were still moments. A shared joke beside a brazier, a song hummed beneath breath, a morning when the air smelled like lilacs instead of coal, a master who spared harshness, a stranger who offered a plum, a girl who stitched a flower into the hem of her work just because she could. These were the quiet rebellions of spirit, the flickers of childhood surviving inside labor. To tell these stories is not only to mourn, it is to notice, to bear witness, and perhaps to offer a kind of rest to those long gone. Because even now, as you lie still and the night enfolds you, the memory of their labor lingers, not as a burden, but as a thread in the great cloth of human life. And it is a cloth woven not only of effort, but of care. Care was always there, in some form. A mother mending a shirt by firelight, a neighbor slipping bread to an apprentice, a dog curled beside a rat-catcher's boy, warm and unjudging, a nun laying cool cloths on a fevered brow. Though the work was constant, so too were the small kindnesses, the human touches that made the burden bearable. There was care, too, in the quiet hopes held close, a dream of shoes that fit, of a softer blanket, of a day off when it rained, a sibling's laugh, a teacher's rare praise, the warmth of soup after a cold walk. These small wishes tucked between long days were a form of resistance, too. Not loud, but lasting, the kind that rooted children to the world and gave them something to hold on to. And now we let go of it all. We lay down the soot and the tools, the bells and the pots, the spinning and the stone. We leave behind the salt air of the docks, the damp echo of tunnels, the stink of cesspits, and the clang of the forge. We close the shutters on the past, not to forget it, but to give it peace. In this moment you rest not just for yourself, but for them, for the children who never could. You carry their memory into sleep, like a lullaby passed from hand to hand across centuries. Let your breathing slow. Let the images drift away. The chimney is no longer dark. The mine has no echo. The bell tower is still. There are no orders to follow, no masters to obey. There is only quiet. And if, as you drift into sleep, you feel the presence of tiny footsteps or hear the faint rhythm of thread pulled through cloth, know that it is only the memory of labor softening into rest. The past does not vanish. It settles like mist around your shoulders. So breathe deep. The work is done. The day has ended. The stories have been told. And now, their labor done, we drift off.